Now welcoming on the Second Swing Thoughts podcast, it is master fitter Tyler Fitzel, and who better to bring in to talk about wedges than the wedge magician himself. How are we doing, Tyler?
I'm doing really well. Razor sharp, actually. Razor sharp.
All right, so before we get into the deep dive into some of these fitting questions, what wedges are you playing this year?
Yeah. Oh, man.
Or what wedges have you played, I guess?
Yeah, let's go there. Okay. That's easier. So SM10, I've got some Vokies. Played the new King Cobra 2025 wedges. Love those. Trying to give those kind of a real, put them through the paces type. Very interesting. I don't think I've had Cobra before, so that's been kind of cool. The new Mizuno wedges. So I've got a bunch of the T1s and did some different colors there. So I got a blue, a black, and just one of their white satins. I found a lot of really good success. I've been, wedges are typically very easy for me, just as like I'm comfortable with them. I've kind of got my practice, my routine, and, shot is a shot. So, but yeah, doing really well.
All right. Yeah. Well, that's awesome to hear. And we're going to kind of get deep into some common fitting questions and kind of dive deeper into, wedge fitting, because they are your scoring clubs, whether you're attacking greens to, set up birdies or just scrambling, these are, some of the most important clubs in your bag. So I guess just to start off, something very, most of our fitting bays are indoor fittings, right?
Yes.
Obviously, golf is played outside primarily. How do you fit wedges inside?
Yeah, the wedge game is unique in that obviously there's a lot of different conditions that we have to use. Also, the idea that a wedge is not necessarily a full swing club, right? I kind of tell people you might have to go from 5 feet to like 55 yards. So using one club, but differently all the way around. We do like to use more of a full swing in the hitting bay to try to get just a general idea about what some of the distances, the height or launch angle, the spin rate. I go back to the 4 things that happen to a golf ball: ball speed, launch, spin, and direction. So those 4 things influence what's going on. That's how we look at wedges as well. Indoors, we don't have the dirt, which is one where you'd say, how does this interact with the turf? But we also don't have temperature to worry about. We don't have weather to worry about, or bugs, or, those types of things. And so when we're indoors, we get a really good handle on what they're going to do as a baseline. But the game is played outside, so you have to get outside and play it. That's where fittings indoor take away variables. Outside, you add those variables back in and see what's going on.
Yeah, and so speaking of turf interaction, that's all about the wedge grind, the bounce.
Yep.
First, let's start off, wedge grind and bounce. Everyone hears it. You hear, low bounce, high bounce, you have all the different kinds of grinds, whether it's leading edge, trailing edge, trimmed some stuff off. What exactly is wedge grind? What exactly is wedge bounce?
So let's start with bounce. And bounce is really just the curvature or the amount of curvature on the bottom of a club. So you have the leading edge of the wedge that gets down into the turf. The bounce is usually dictated primarily by what type of attack angle we see. Is somebody move that aggressively downward? If you move downward a lot, we want the bounce on the bottom of the club to be higher to help that club come back out, right? So into the turf, out of the turf. If we have someone that's maybe a little bit more neutral, we might have a more middle number to bounce. So say, for instance, 14 is usually a very high bounce number. Then you got about 10, and then you've got about 8. You can get into some that are even like 6. But when we start talking about what you do with the club, the bounce number is a lot more about the type of attack angle that you present. How are you bringing that club down into the turf? Now, when it's in the turf, the grind comes into play in terms of what you'd like that club to do in the turf. So, for instance, we shave some off of the heel or the toe, or we kind of have an area that on the backside, we call it trailing relief. You might take a bunch off the backside so that the club can get down and in and then back out again. There's some other unique grinds. Tiger Woods has one from TaylorMade Wedge right now that's kind of unique. There's a pre-worn sole. It's got a higher bounce number, but the pre-worn sole gets it to sit down so it can act like a lower bounce number. Then there's the middle part on the bottom, that acts like a higher bounce number. Then there's the shaved off on the back, which again acts like a lower bounce number. So depending on whether you open or close it, you can get something that performs differently depending on how you use it. So the bounce is really about, you know, how you get that club in there and how you want to get it back out. But the turf interaction itself depends on the grind. Yeah.
Okay, so when players coming in for a wedge fitting, and obviously, like you said, you're looking more at full swings, but how do you kind of determine, you know, an ideal bounce and grind combination that they should be playing?
Yeah, I like to use the idea of wet sand versus dry sand. Generally or typically, we're going to be using a wedge out of sand. So when I have something that's very wet, very firm, I don't want a lot of bounce, because what'll happen is it'll get down into that firm turf and it will bounce it back up. And if I have a lot, I want a lot when I need a lot. And so that's where you start to kind of differ the amount of bounce or the different types of grinds. I like to look at the highest lofted club that you're going to carry generally should have about the least amount of bounce, so that if I need a very, you know, short shot or like a chip shot, I can get the club underneath as much as possible, so that the ball, the club doesn't bounce and kind of hit the middle of the ball. And then the other side of that too is if you were to get into sand, it might be really heavy sand or very fluffy sand. If I have something without bounce, it's going to keep digging in, so the club almost continues to get stuck in the sand. That's the same thing that happens when we start talking about a very firm lie on top of like a lot of grass. So we can talk about like thick grass. We can talk about bare grass or bare ground. We can talk about turf that is very, very cut down, very thin and very firm. And so we have all these conditions. Generally, even in a round of golf, you might see 3 different conditions, from firm to maybe a little bit softer to something, you know, in the sand that might be fluffy. So you want to be able to have versatility. And that's one of the reasons why we look at different clubs having different bounce and grind options. So say, for instance, the highest loft, if I'll carry a 60 or even a 62, when I have that for a purpose, so that I can use it in certain situations, where generally speaking, I use something like a 56 degree for just pretty much all around purpose type chipping. And then we see a lot of people will come in with maybe really high bounce in the high number and really low bounce in a lower number. That's okay too, if that combination fits what you're trying to achieve. Another thing too is just, it's not just the bounce and the grind itself, it's really how you use it. When the club is in motion and you're trying to get down into that turf, you might only make kind of one move with it, which is fine. You just have a general square it up and go down and through. And that's where you might find someone who just needs, let's say, for instance, a 10-degree bounce on all of the clubs, because you're not trying to manipulate it. You just prefer setting up and just moving the club the same way. So having the same bounce is great, because you're just going to try to move it that way. We're being functional with the type of club you've got in your hand, but of course it's for a reason.